Hello, everybody. We're about to get started with our presentation, but first we'll do a few housekeeping items. So we advise everyone to close other running applications to help maintain a stable audio and video connection. We also advise that if your connection freezes, just exit GoToWebinar and then return to the session. We will be providing a copy of the video and the slides for the presentation. We will post them on CASLPO's website on our Canadian Accredited Programs page within the next few weeks. And we will also just email all of the participants in today's webinar just to let you know when those slides and the video are available. You can enter questions in the questions section as we go through the presentation at any time. We will answer questions at specific times during the presentations. One will be after we've completed the registration with CASLPO and the CEPT exam portion of the presentation. And then again, we'll have a question section after the mentorship section of the presentation. If we don't have time to answer all the questions that are submitted during the presentation, we will answer those questions via email after the presentation. The agenda for this presentation will include a 5-minute bio break before we get to the mentorship section of the presentation. All right, so first we will introduce all the presenters. So my name is Colleen Myrie, and I am the Director of Registration Services with the college.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Samita Joglekar, and I'm the Audiology Practice Advisor and the Manager of the Mentorship Program.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Anne Brown, the CEPT Exams Manager at Speech, Language, and Audiology Canada.
Also online with us today is Jessica Lafrette, who will be our online support and moderator in the questions section. The presentation itself will consist of 5 different sections. The first, we'll talk about the importance of registration or licensure. Then we'll talk about the importance of good character. We'll talk about becoming CASLPO registrant. Then the Canadian entry to practice exams for the professions of audiology and speech language pathology. And our final section will be about CASLPO's mentorship program. So let's get started. The importance of registration and licensure. So the College of Audiologists and Speech Language Pathologists is the regulatory body for audiologists and speech language pathologists in the province of Ontario. To work in Ontario as an audiologist or a speech language pathologist, you must hold a certificate of registration or a license issued by CASLPO. The college establishes the minimum requirements necessary for entry to practice in the professions of audiology and speech language pathology in order to protect the public from harm. Without regulations or registration, the public would be vulnerable to unsafe and incompetent healthcare providers. Registration with the college ensures that audiologists and speech language pathologists have met a minimum set of qualifications before practicing. Regulations benefit the public because essential qualifications are identified. A decision is made as to whether or not an individual is qualified to practice, and the college has a process for responding to complaints and concerns from the public about the care that they receive. Registration or licensure with CASLPO provides an individual with the legal authority to use the professional title. We have audiologist, speech language pathologist, speech therapist. It also includes any abbreviations or variations on this title in Ontario. And it also includes making any representation to the public that an individual is qualified to practice audiology or speech language pathology in Ontario. So throughout our presentation, we'll be drawing from scenarios that we've put together to kind of illustrate the points that we're trying to make. And within these scenarios, sometimes we will initiate polls that you can interact with us and answer these questions in the scenarios. So our first one, we have Mia, who has completed her master's degree in speech language pathology at University X and plans to work in Ontario, but is not a registrant of CASLPO yet. Mia decides to create the following LinkedIn profile. So it says Mia Jones, speech language pathologist, pre-registered, Ottawa, Canada area. And it says, I am a pre-registered speech language pathologist based in Ontario. I have excellent communication skills and pride myself on my ability to develop a rapport with clients and their families. Is the information in Mia's LinkedIn profile acceptable according to CASLPO regulations? We have A, yes, B, no, C, maybe.
So we've just launched the poll. You should see it on your screen and you can go ahead and participate. All right, we'll just give a few more seconds to let people put in their choice. All right, and we'll close the poll and share the results. There we go.
All righty. So the answer is no. Mia is using the protected title, speech language pathologist, although, and it is a variation by including pre-registered. We don't really have, well, we don't have a certificate of registration called pre-registered, so she cannot use that. And in the summary, she's also saying that she's a pre-registered speech language pathologist, and she's kind of talking about her qualifications. So again, she is holding herself as qualified to practice. So that leads us into a discussion about good character, which is important as you become registered with a college. So what is good character? We have this word cloud that talks about integrity, honesty, conduct, values, morality. But when we're talking about good character with respect to college registration regulations, we have a specific definition that's in the regulations. So in the regulations, it says that applicants' past and present conduct must afford reasonable grounds for the belief that the applicant does not have a physical or mental condition or disorder that could affect his or her ability to practice the profession in a safe manner, will practice the profession with decency, integrity, and honesty in accordance with the law, and will display an appropriate professional attitude. So we are bringing a real life scenario that we've gotten from the College of Physiotherapists. While we are using an example from one outside of our college, just to say that all professions kind of experience similar conduct issues and are guided in how they handle it in the same way, because we're all under the same act, which is the Regulated Health Professions Act, and the code that is under the Regulated Health Professions Act. So in this scenario, we just want to point out that the physiotherapists, they have to do a competency exam that has two components. The applicant must pass the written component before taking the clinical component. And the college received an application for an independent practice certificate of registration from an individual who successfully passed the written component of the physiotherapy competency exam. The person had previously held a provisional practice certificate of registration for about a year, but the applicant failed to complete the clinical component of the exam before their provisional practice certificate expired. So after 2 unsuccessful attempts, the applicant completed the clinical component and then applied for the independent practice certificate. However, a few months before passing the PCE clinical, the patient told the college that the individual was holding themselves out as a registered physiotherapist, illegally providing patient care, and claiming to be a physiotherapist. The applicant said that after informing the clinical owner, who was a registered physiotherapist, that they had failed the clinical component, they were strongly encouraged to continue working at the clinic as a physiotherapy assistant to gain some clinical experience. This quickly escalated to the person conducting assessments independently, developing treatment plans and goals, and working without informing patients that they were in fact a physiotherapist assistant. The case was reviewed by the College of Physiotherapists registration committee, and the applicant's conduct demonstrated a disregard for the law and the principles of decency, integrity, and honesty that members of the profession are expected to uphold. So while the College of Physiotherapists did recognize the power imbalance that sometimes exists between employers and employees, the college concluded that it is always the responsibility of the physiotherapist to ensure that they are following the rules. So the college decided to issue an independent practice certificate to the applicant with terms, conditions, and limitations, including meeting with a senior physiotherapist advisor and successful completion of an ethics course. The applicant was responsible for the costs associated. In addition, an investigation was launched against the clinic owner. So what this points out is that misconduct before registration may trigger an inquiry into an applicant's suitability to practice. Each application would be assessed by the registration committee on a case-by-case basis if it is referred to the registration committee. And the committee would want to know what the applicant's conduct was and the details of the conduct before a decision can be made about that applicant's registration with the college. So again, This is a similar process across all health professions. So before you get into any trouble, of course, you have to think about becoming registered with the college. And you actually have some options as you are approaching registration. You can complete your initial registration with CASLPO and then take the Canadian Entry to Practice exam during your 6-month term of your initial practice period. Or you may wish to complete your exam and pass it and then apply for CASLPO registration. Whichever approach you do is totally up to you. You can also do both of them at the same time, depending on the timing of both the registration exam itself. So as I was saying, where you start is, could depend on timing, but it's up to you which approach you want to take. If you decide to do your registration with the college, we have 2 steps as part of our registration process, the application process and the registration process. We'll talk about getting registered with the CASLPO first, and then after we're done with that, we'll move on to enrolling for the CETP exam and the process associated with writing that exam. So the application process. It starts, of course, with an application form. You can download the application form from our website. Just to let you know, we are in transition. Today we have launched a brand new website, and so we didn't include links in this presentation, but when we do post them on our website, we will include links so that you can click them, and then it will take you to the appropriate place on our website. The next step after you've completed your application form is you need to send us official transcripts from your graduate program. So CASLPO requires official transcripts to be sent to us directly from your university. We also require that you submit a letter from your program director verifying the completion of your master's degree program and also verifying the date that your degree will be conferred. This is often because at the time that you are, most people are submitting their applications to us, your degree hasn't been awarded yet. So we want to get that confirmation from your program that you have indeed completed that program, and along with, as we said, your transcript as well. Photocopies of this letter would not be acceptable. It has to be an original letter sent to the college. We also have an application fee of $150. And just again, saying that the documents that must be originals are, of course, your transcript, which would be sent to the college in a university sealed envelope, or it could be an official e-transcript if your university has that service available. The letter from your program director may be emailed to the college directly from the university as well. So how long does the process take? So once your application form has been received, it takes about 3 weeks for us to review your documents, and we will send you an email just letting you know the documents which we have received and any that are still outstanding. Once a completed application has been received, it will be reviewed by college staff to determine if all of the requirements for registration have been met. If your application is approved, you will be notified by email that you are now eligible for registration with the college. The college is committed to processing applications as quickly as possible and in the order that each application is received. So we would ask you to please resist the temptation of calling the college to check on the status of your application, as it slows down the process significantly. And we cannot change the order of applications. So again, we have another scenario. Mia is concerned that her courier company didn't send her application package correctly. Could Mia contact the college to confirm the receipt of her application? So we have another polling question.
Poll has been launched. And we'll just give everybody a moment to participate. Okay, just a few more seconds here. If you haven't participated, go ahead and do so. And we're going to close the poll now and just share the results. As you can see, most people have said no. Some have said yes and maybe.
Okay, so you are correct if you said no. Once we have received your application form, you will receive an email from us within 3 weeks indicating which documents we've received and if any are outstanding. We will not have any information to provide to you before that time. So we would just advise you to refrain from calling. However, definitely if we've gone past the 3 weeks, we do encourage you to call and try and follow up to find out if we've received your application. We have another scenario. Mia's potential employer calls Jessica Lafarette, who is our program assistant at CASLPO, to say, I would like to hire this graduating student for a position we have. We need her to start in 2 weeks, otherwise the children at the center will not get the services that they are entitled to. Should CASLPO push this file to the top of the queue so that she may start her employment in time? Again, we will open up that poll.
All right, so go ahead and participate in the poll. We have a few votes that have come through so far, or people who have put in their answer. All right, and we'll close and share. And the majority have said no.
All right, which is the correct answer. So, the principle behind this is that CASLPO must provide an impartial, transparent, and fair process for all applicants. If we were to advance Mia's file because the children at that center would not receive service, it would be unfair to the other applicants who have submitted their application earlier and who also may have patients who are awaiting their services. So again, once the college has confirmed in an email that the application is complete, the application is placed in a queue and for review, and we don't deviate from that order. We would just say plan ahead. Speak to your potential employers about the application timeline and the registration processes. And it is, again, we just want to make it clear that it's not possible for CASLPO to expedite any applications. So we also want to say that if you have not met the requirements for registration, or if there's a deficiency, maybe a concern about good character, your application would be referred to the college's registration committee for further review. And the committee meets quarterly, so your application timeline will be increased by 3 to 6 months. One final note about contacting the college. We want to say that for confidentiality reasons, we can't speak to anyone other than the applicant about their application without the applicant's permission. Therefore, the college cannot provide information about an application to a parent, a spouse, or an employer without the applicant's written permission. All right. So we're moving on to the registration process because it is the next step after having completed the application review process. So once you have had your application successfully reviewed and you are deemed eligible for registration, you'll receive a registration form from CASLPO's program assistant, and then you can proceed to complete your registration. So you're applying for an initial certificate of registration. However, in order to complete the registration process, you do have to have an offer of employment in Ontario to work as either an audiologist or a speech pathologist. And you also have to have an eligible mentor lined up. So when you submit your registration form to us that has been fully completed, it will take about 5 business days to process it. So you should, again, plan ahead and submit it at least 5 business days from when you intend to start working. We also, of course, require you to include your mentor's name on that registration form. We ask, this one is only if it's available. So if you have already taken the CETP exam, you should let us know so that we can find your exam results and include them with your file. If you are enrolled to take the CETP exam before you get to the registration portion of your application, please just submit a copy of your registration to us. If you have done neither of these things yet, we will just follow up with you about your enrollment in the exam during your initial practice period. We also require that you submit a signed undertaking, and this is if you haven't passed the exam yet. So an undertaking is required because the registrar may issue an initial certificate to you prior to an applicant having taken that CETP exam. So the applicant must sign an agreement to write the CETP exam for their profession during the 6-month term of their initial certificate of registration. And this agreement is known as an undertaking. So the undertaking that you sign, you are agreeing to take the exam during your 6-month term of your initial certificate. And you're also agreeing to stop practicing within 30 days if you fail the exam during your initial practice period. And if you do fail the exam, you can only reapply for CASLPO registration after you've passed the exam. And depending on your situation, the continuation of mentorship may or may not be required. So we also require that you include your employment start date on your registration form. However, if you haven't really nailed that down yet, you can just indicate that it's unknown, or maybe if your employer just will start you working after your registration is complete, you can say just pending completion of registration. We require that you submit your employment information. That's the location where you intend to practice. We also require that you include a HR contact information. That would be the name and the email address of the HR person within the company where you're going to be working. We also require that you obtain professional liability insurance coverage. And so you're required to submit the carrier name, the policy certificate number, and the expiry date of the policy, along with the coverage has to be a minimum of $2 million per claim. If you are a member of SAC, they provide insurance coverage for their members at a reasonable rate. I guess the CAA for audiologists, they also provide insurance coverage if you are a member. So you're also required to provide us with proof of your ability to work in Canada. So that could be a copy of your document proving Canadian citizenship, such as your birth certificate, a valid Canadian passport, or your Canadian citizenship card, both sides of that document. If you're not a Canadian citizen, but a permanent resident, you can provide us with a copy of either your record of landing or your permanent resident card. And if you are on a work permit, you can provide us with a copy of your work permit, and that would be sufficient to show that you are able to work in Canada. We have a registration fee of $50 that has to be included with your registration form. And we also require a prorated annual fee. So the prorated fee represents a quarter of, well, it's divided up into quarters depending on how much of the registration period is left for the year. So if you become registered this summer or fall, you're just paying for the 1/4 of the registration period, because our CASLPO's registration year runs from October 1st to September 30th. We have a fee chart that is available on our website where you can find the prorated amount that would be due for the period that you are starting your registration. And I will, of course, provide that link in these slides when I post. The registration processing timeline, I think I've mentioned that it's 5 business days once we've received all the documentation for the registration process. And then we would issue your certificate once everything has been reviewed. So Mia has asked, can she start working as an audiologist or a speech language pathologist once she applies to CASLPO? And I guess this is a polling question.
Go ahead and input your response whenever you're ready. Okay, we'll close that poll and share the results. You can see there the majority have said no, some yes, some not sure.
Okay, so the answer is no. Individuals cannot work as audiologists and speech language pathologists until after they have been issued a certificate of registration by CASLPO. However, Mia can start working as support personnel before her certificate of registration has been issued by CASLPO. So it is important for Mia to remember that a student's role in a clinical placement is not the same as the role of a support person. So if Mia wants to work as support personnel before getting her CASLPO registration, it is important that she follows the guidance provided in the college position statements on the use of support personnel for either SLPs or audiologists. And those documents, again, can be found on our website. So you've completed your registration. Congratulations. You are now an audiologist or a speech language pathologist. And we have fireworks because we think it's worthy of celebration. The CASLPO, as I was mentioning, our registration year runs from October 1st in one year and ends September 30th in the next year. And so if you become registered in either the summer or early fall before October 1st, you will have to renew your certificate. So, and all CASLPO registrants, including those newly registered, do have to renew. And when you renew, you're paying for the full registration period. So it's the 1 year period. So our next, we're talking about the entry to practice exams for audiology and speech language pathology. And I have a few slides, and then I will hand things over to Anne to continue. So we just want to point out that registration with CASLPO has a number of different components. You know, you need your master's degree in audiology or speech language pathology. You need to have good character, and you also need to pass the exam. So, you know, it's only one component of the licensure process. And when you're completing registration, you do need to contact the regulatory body to become licensed. So just becoming enrolled for the exam or passing the exam does not mean that you can practice your profession. The Canadian entry to practice exams for audiology and speech language pathology are a non-exemptable requirement for registration with CASLPO, except for applicants who hold full registration in good standing with another regulated Canadian province and have practiced prior to applying for registration in Ontario. So if you are applying for registration in another province before you intend to maybe move to Ontario, you should consult with that province about their registration process, because we're similar, but some provinces are slightly different. So definitely talk to them about their requirements. So now I'll pass things over to Anne, and she can talk to you about the SAC exam, or the CEPT exam, sorry.
Thank you. So yes, I'd also like to introduce my colleague, Christiane Menard, who is also on this presentation. And should we have any questions, Christiane might be able to answer them at the end as well. So again, I just really wanted to introduce Christiane and welcome her also. So SAC has two primary functions. The first would be that we are developing, implementing, and evaluating programs and services that help support and advance the professions. In addition, we're also developing and delivering the National Entry to Practice exam on behalf of regulatory bodies that have adopted the exam. I've got resources there, linked there to the SAC website for general information and a whole host of resources there, and as well the CEPT microsite that has a lot of information on the exam. So today I think we'll kind of cover four broad areas, a little bit about exam eligibility and enrollment, preparing for the exam, the day of the exam, and what to expect afterwards. We've set out the exam dates for the next couple of years. Typically, an exam is end of June, early July, end of October, and then end of February. There's an enrollment period for 1 month prior to each exam being delivered. So for example, the enrollment for the July exam is the month of April, for October, the month of August, for February, the month of December. What also happens during that enrollment period, if you need a testing accommodation, is to get all that information also into SAC, into the exam manager, so that that can be processed, approved, and worked through for the day of the exam. So a little bit about kind of what will happen at a general level. So when you're ready to take the exam, or you would like to enroll, if you're a recent grad or a current student, your university program director will typically sign a document confirming that you are eligible to write the upcoming exam. Should your program director not be able to do that, your eligibility will be determined by CASLPO. The details on the conditional enrollment, applicants will enroll for the exam going into the CETP website. There's a link to enrollment. Conditional enrollment is only valid for the first exam. So if you are taking the exam for the second time, your eligibility will need to be approved by CASLPO. And for some reason, if you enroll and you're not eligible, you'll have a full refund for your fees. So just a couple of things at the CETP website. All these resources are provided for you, along with many more. But just in general, as you prepare for the exam, this particular place on the site is very helpful. It's got the national competency profiles there for both professions, and the exam blueprint that results from those competencies. So you'll know through reading through the exam blueprint how much or what percentage of each competency is reflected into the exam. So you might know areas that you might want to spend a little bit more time studying. The SAC Code of Ethics is there. There's a webcast there on how to prepare for the exam and a study guide, some tips on writing competency-based exams, and some sample questions in both professions. And what will be coming very soon is the curriculum standards will be posted there. And as well, I know that some of you are current students who might not be quite ready to write the exam. So make sure to go back to the site from time to time and see what's new. So in terms of writing the exam, there are two types of questions: individual questions, and then questions that are based on case scenarios where there might be 4 or 5 questions that relate to the top question. There's 4 response options, meaning A, B, C, or D. They're all multiple choice. There's only 1 correct answer with 3 plausible distractors. There aren't any questions that are for not all of the above or pick A and D. And there's no negatively phrased questions, so choose the answer that's incorrect is not a type of question on the exam. So in terms of the length, it's 3 hours and 45 minutes based on the exam blueprint. There's 170 multiple choice questions, 90 in the first booklet and 80 in the second, with a small break in between. There are 2 kind of formats that you can take the exam in, one at an exam center and the other through live remote proctoring. And you can choose that at the time of enrollment. Candidates must select also at enrollment if they would like to take the exam in English or French, and you can toggle between the 2 languages during the exam. So for the day of the exam, remind yourself there's only 1 correct answer in all those multiple choice questions with plausible distractors. You can bring in a 8.5 by 14 whiteboard. There are no pens and papers that are allowed in, but also there's an electronic notepad on the exam platform. So remember, it's a long day. Eat and drink beforehand. We're understanding from people who have gone through the exam that it can be, again, a long day, so it's helpful to take a day off afterwards. Dress in layers, as the temperature of the room might vary throughout the exam. And again, if you need a testing accommodation, make sure that's all submitted well in advance and approved. And try to manage your time throughout the entire exam timeframe to make sure that you've allocated yourself enough time to get through it. And make sure to be reviewing the material well in advance on how to set yourself up technically for that day, how you set yourself up at an exam center or, again, through the live remote proctoring. And after the exam, you'll have your results. They'll be available 4 to 6 weeks after you write. The exam manager will send you an email letting you know that you can go onto the site and get your full exam results. SAC will advise CASLPO of a pass-fail, and then you'll continue on with your registration process with CASLPO. And don't forget to check back at SAC for professional resources throughout your career. And again, just a reminder, not enrolling or taking the exam does allow you to practice the profession. So again, the exam's just one component of the overall licensure process. And congratulations on everything that you've done thus far. And my email is there, the SAC exams manager email is there. And I'm sorry that some of the fonts have gone off. Something must have happened as I flipped the presentation to CASLPO. Apologies.
All right. Let me just put my camera on just to say that we are opening up the floor for questions. So Jessica, if you can let us know if there is any questions in the chat.
Hi, Colleen. Yep, I just have a couple. So the first one is, can you provide a time range from the beginning to end of registration? And the way I'm interpreting this question is from when they submit their application until they become registered.
Yeah,
I'm going to send that to you, Colleen.
I guess we don't provide a time range because there could be delays in the process after each component, and because there is a bit of back and forth. So we have published timelines that we put on our website that provides kind of the specific timeline for each step along the way. You know, if you add them all up, it would give you a general idea of how long it would take. But again, we are always subject to those delays in between each of those stages, so that it could possibly take longer than the estimates that we've provided. So again, I would just encourage you to go to our website in where we have the timelines for the application process, and you can make that estimate of how long it's generally going to take. Again, you know, I just want to encourage you to, you can provide those timelines to any employer who's interested in how long it's going to take, and please be as truthful as possible to your employer about where you are in the application process.
Thanks, Colleen. I have another question. A lot of questions came pouring in, by the way.
Okay.
So another question I have is, do you need liability insurance as an SLP prior to obtaining the initial registration certificate with CASLPO?
You actually, you have to provide us with evidence that you have it when you become registered. However, with insurance, they might issue the insurance at the same time that you are potentially starting your registration. So for instance, you'll kind of sign up for the insurance and you can provide us with the information that they need, but you'll have to probably then show them evidence that you are registered before they actually issue the policy. So it's a little bit of a back and forth, but as long as you can get those little pieces of information that we need, your registration will go forward. But yes, you do have to have it before we actually issue the certificate.
Okay, next question I have is, are we allowed to submit our transcripts before we start / complete the application form?
Absolutely. You can have them sent off to us, and we will file them. And when your application comes in, we'll just match that information to your file. And, you know, basically, you know, there are those documents that we say have to come directly from other sources. And as we get them, we'll just match them to your application.
Can I ask 1 or 2 more questions?
Absolutely.
Okay, so the next one I have is, once you pass the CEPT exam, is there a certain time frame in which you must apply / register with the college?
Well, we are still developing a lot of policies with respect to the CEPT exam. And one such discussion that we're currently having with the registration committee is around the length of time that your score for the CEPT exam may be valid. So I don't really have a specific answer about that yet, but it is something that we're currently talking about, and I do expect us to have probably a response to that before the end of this year.
And I do have a question for Anne. The question is, can we bring a whiteboard in to the exam if we are writing the exam from home?
Yes, I believe all exam writers may bring in a whiteboard. Christiane, do you want to verify that?
Yep, it's everyone who writes.
Okay, I think this one's, so Colleen, I believe it was you that said this. It could have been Anne. You mentioned that the program director informs you if we are eligible to write the exam. do we need to initiate having them pass along that information to you, or do they know to do this?
They do that for every exam sitting.
Okay.
Just to clarify, they don't confirm that you're eligible. They confirm that you finished both components of your master's, the clinical and the classroom as well. They confirm that you finished your program.
Thank you. Another question for Anne and Christiane. For the CETP exam, you said we're allowed to bring in a whiteboard. This person wants to confirm the size of the whiteboard is 8.5 by 14 allowed?
Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
That's the maximum size. If you want to bring a smaller one, you can. But that's the maximum size, yeah.
Okay. And Colleen, let me know if we have any more time for questions right now.
I think let's keep going until we hit 7 o'clock, and then we'll take
Perfect.
it.
How far in it, this is for Anne and Christiane, how far in advance to start studying for the exam is recommended?
Well, I think that probably your studying for the exam is really an ongoing process as you're in your university program.
Thank you,
So
Anne.
we've got someone who provides, or some recent graduates or people who have run through the exam recently, typically provide study tips to candidates. But I really believe it's as soon as possible, as soon as you know that you are going to write, try to make a study plan. You know yourself on how long it will take you to kind of work through all the topic areas in your profession, and how busy you are in your life as well. If you're juggling jobs, a family, everyone's going to be different on how that goes.
Thanks,
But
Anne.
give yourself enough time to be successful and be comfortable.
Appreciate it. Colleen, I think this one might be for you, or Anne. Do we need to have registered for the CETP before we can apply to register with the college? I saw that CETP registration doesn't open until August 1st.
Okay, so I'll answer this one is no. You can apply for registration before you enroll or for the CEPT exam. And you can actually start your, if say the enrollment period happens after you're actually issued an initial certificate, that's when you would enroll. And you would, once you've enrolled, you would just send us a confirmation that you have enrolled, and continue on with your initial practice period and write the exam whenever it's scheduled within your initial practice period. So yeah, you can definitely start CASLPO's registration process before you enroll, register for the CETP exam.
Perfect. And then one last question. Is the application and registration process done online, or does anything need to be sent via snail mail?
In terms of the application process for CASLPO, we are currently developing an online process, but we haven't, we aren't ready to launch it yet. So this year you will have to complete the forms that we have. We are making them into fillable PDFs, so you can fill them out and email them to us as attachments. And as we said, some documents do have to be sent to us from the university. So we will, if your university doesn't have an e-transcript service, we will of course be getting something via snail mail, if you say, but again, it's probably only your transcript that we would get that way. The letter from the program director, oftentimes they will email those to us. So, you know, we work mostly through email, and only the things that have to be originals, like the transcript, would come through regular mail.
Thank you, Colleen. So that's it for questions at this time. We answered a lot. I still have a lot more, and I just want to let you guys know that if we don't get to your question in this webinar, we will respond to each and every one of you over the next little while. So just know that we will get to your question. It just might not be live in this webinar. Thank you so much.
All right, so we're gonna let you go for a little bit for that 5-minute bio break. And so we will be back at 7:06.
All right, welcome back, everyone. It is 6 minutes past 7, so we'll get started. Hope everybody had enough time for a break. And we're going to move into the last part of the presentation this evening, which is on the CASLPO mentorship program. So again, my name is Samita Joglakar. I am the manager of the mentorship program at CASLPO, and I'm also the audiology practice advisor for the college. So let's start with, why does CASLPO have a mentorship program? Well, the first reason is because it is a registration requirement. So in the registration regulation of the college, it says that all initial certificate holders must complete a 6-month mentorship period. The process of mentorship introduces you to CASLPO's quality assurance program, and this happens through a process of practice reflection that you go through, where you are reflecting on your practice and evaluating your own practice, reflecting on how you meet the practice standards of the profession. And you're also filling out an online self-assessment tool, which I'll talk to you about a little bit later in the presentation as well. So this whole process is introducing you to the process of quality assurance. And for the college, it's an important process to introduce you to, because it's also a way to confirm your competency to practice. So the Canadian Entry to Practice exam is one measure of competency. And then going through the mentorship program is another measure of competency, where you're actually beginning your practice and practicing in the profession and reflecting on standards and how you meet those standards. So for the college, this is an important process that confirms your competency and that relates to the protection of the public. So let's talk about the basics of mentorship. Mentorship is always a minimum of 6 months, and it begins when you're registered to practice with CASLPO. Over the course of your 6-month mentorship, you must provide at least 500 hours of direct patient care, and your mentor must provide you with at least 48 hours of guidance. This guidance can be direct or indirect. Direct would be sitting in the same room or on a video call having a conversation about your practice. Indirect guidance would be over the phone or over email, for example. We ask that this guidance from your mentor be spread evenly over time. So we recommend 2 hours per week that your mentor spends with you, having practice-related discussions, talking about the patients that you've been seeing, your clinical reasoning, and the standards. So 2 hours per week is what we recommend, or it could be twice per month where you spend 4 hours with your mentor. But we don't want all of this guidance to be clumped at the beginning or at the end. There should be consistent interaction and communication that you're having with your mentor over this 6-month period. And during your mentorship, some direct observation from your mentor is mandatory. So a frequent question we get is, how many direct observation hours are required? And the answer to this is that the college doesn't require a specific number of direct observation hours. This is going to be at your mentor's or perhaps your employer's discretion. The amount of direct observation of your practice should be based on a few different things. First, it should be based on your experience, skills, and confidence. So if you're going into an area of practice that you don't have much experience in, maybe your clinical placements in your master's degree didn't really introduce you as much to that area, then you might require more direct observation. And your employer might require this, or your mentor might think that that's needed. You should also consider the risk of harm associated with the clinical activities that you will be performing. So if you're going straight into a job where you'll be doing assessment of swallowing or working with patients who have complex medical histories, such as stroke, this environment is, these types of clinical activities would have a higher risk of harm, and so more direct observation of your practice might be needed. So this will depend on the practice environment as well as the workplace expectations. And of course, your mentor will decide how much direct observation is needed to confirm that you meet standards. So this is an important responsibility that your mentor is taking, to observe you, to discuss your practice, and to report back to the college on your ability to meet the standards. So your mentor will need to observe you a certain amount in order to appropriately make this determination. So I recommend that you have a look at the mentorship guidelines. It's a very comprehensive document. It describes the whole mentorship process. It's available to you at any time on the website. And it has lots of information, including information on the guidance and observation that's required in mentorship. So going back to the basics of mentorship, you will complete the mentorship self-assessment tool. We call that the MSAT, over the course of your 6-month mentorship period. The MSAT includes a self-assessment on the practice standards, and you'll be uploading evidence in this tool to show how you meet the standards. There's also a clinical reasoning tool that's built into the MSAT. That requirement, it happens at the midterm, where we require you to complete this clinical reasoning tool with your mentor. And your mentor will use the mentorship self-assessment tool to assess you on the standards, and will submit a midterm and final report of your progress to the college directly through the MSAT. So here's another frequently asked question that we get. Can I start my mentorship before I write the Canadian Entry to Practice exam? And we've already talked about this a little bit. Colleen talked about it in her part of the presentation, but the answer to this question is yes. You can obtain your initial registration and start your mentorship period. We say initial practice period. Initial practice period is when your mentorship is occurring. So the initial practice period and the mentorship are happening in tandem. However, if you decide to begin your mentorship, so you apply to the college, you become registered, and you begin your mentorship before you pass the CETP exam, there are some things to keep in mind. Colleen mentioned this already, but you will be required to sign an undertaking to write the Canadian Entry to Practice exam during your mentorship period. And if you don't pass the exam, then you must stop practicing. And you'll need to transfer your patients within 30 days. And this means that your mentorship will be interrupted. Your certificate of registration will expire, and it will be reinstated when the college has confirmation that you've passed the exam. So this is important to keep in mind if you're going to go ahead and start your mentorship before you've written and passed the exam. These are also points that you'll want to inform your employer of, because if you still need to write the exam and you've started your mentorship, there is that possibility that your mentorship will be interrupted. So it's important that your employer is aware of this. So then the next question that we often get is, how will I resume my mentorship after I pass the exam? So what we do is we send you a mentorship status form. When we learn that you have failed the exam, we ask you to fill out this form to give us an idea of how far along you are in your mentorship period. And then when the college learns that you've passed the exam, we review this status form and we look at your MSAT, and then we'll contact you about resuming your mentorship. You may be able to pick up where you've left off in your mentorship, but it will depend on a few factors, one of which is the evidence of your progress before the interruption, and then if you will remain with the same mentor and the same employer. If you're going to switch mentors and employers, this might mean that we need to extend your mentorship because your new mentor will need enough time to appropriately and accurately talk to you about your practice and assess if you are meeting the practice standards of the profession. So decisions around how you resume mentorship will be discussed with you and evaluated at that time, and will ultimately be at the college's discretion. So let's talk a little bit about mentorship versus supervision, because sometimes there is confusion and people may think that mentorship and supervision are the same thing, but they're not the same thing. So During your mentorship period, you as an initial registrant are accountable for your clinical work and decisions. So what does it mean to be accountable? This is a difference that happens in mentorship versus when you are being supervised. And what that means, what it means to be accountable is it means that you are a professional who is expected and required to explain your actions and decisions. So let's take this a step further and talk about what it means to be a professional. What is professionalism? And if you take a moment and think about this, it's not the easiest question to answer, because professionalism is a lot of different things. It's a lot of different attributes, a lot of different things that are happening at the same time. Part of professionalism is your attitude and your personal philosophy, the whole approach that you bring to your working life. So some of these things would include the desire to be a lifelong learner, to always strive to improve and learn and grow as a professional. Knowing the limitations of your knowledge and scope of practice. So knowing when you don't know the answer to something and knowing when you need to seek more information. Taking the opportunity to be a leader when it's possible for you to do that. Doing your best even on your bad days, and we all have bad days, but part of being a professional or professionalism is always putting your best foot forward. Always putting your patients first. It's a very important responsibility as a healthcare professional. And maintaining your professional boundaries. So professionalism is an attitude, it's an approach, but it's also about behavior. So being responsible, reliable, courteous, honest, showing integrity, being respectful, and of course we're talking about accountability, so being accountable. So we've given an example here when you're late arriving to work or running behind at work, not blaming others or the situation or the circumstances, but reflecting on your own approach, reflecting on what happened that day, and thinking about how you can improve the next time, how you can make sure that that doesn't happen next time. That's all a part of professionalism. So let's have a look at a scenario that is both about professionalism and accountability. So Mia is an initial registrant SLP who works as an independent contractor, and she is told by a senior colleague that consent for assessment doesn't need to be documented in the patient record. But this information that she's received from her colleague is incorrect. Consent for assessment must be documented according to CASLPO practice standards and also the Healthcare Consent Act, which is a piece of legislation. So regrettably, a complaint is filed to the college that involves Mia, and during the investigation of this complaint, patient records are reviewed and it's confirmed that consent for assessment was not documented. So Mia is asked to explain why she didn't document the consent, and her explanation is, I was told by a senior colleague that this was okay, so I trusted them and I didn't question it. I didn't want to create tension between me and my employer, and I was new and I didn't realize that this was wrong. So the question that we're asking is, do you think Mia's justification for her actions and decisions is reasonable in this case? And this is not a polling question. I'll just give you a moment to reflect. But based on what we're talking about, you likely can predict the answer, which is that no, this justification from Mia would not be reasonable in this case. And this is what we mean by talking about accountability, what it means to be accountable. So in Mia's case, she is registered to practice, and when you begin your mentorship, you will be registered to practice with the college. You can use the professional title and the public is recognizing you as a speech language pathologist or audiologist. And it's a big step from being a student. It's a transition that you're making in your professional career. You are now accountable for your practice and accountable for your decisions. And that's a responsibility that comes with being a regulated healthcare professional. And it's one of the reasons why we think mentorship is important, because mentorship is a time when you have the support of an experienced colleague who is acting as your mentor, who's there as a sounding board, as a guide, who you can talk to about your practice, to ensure that you are understanding what you're supposed to be doing in the workplace and also how to meet the minimum standards of the profession. So let's talk a little bit more about the mentor's role, because mentors are not supervisors. We've just talked about how you're not being supervised in mentorship. So what are mentors doing? What is their role? So a mentor's role is to provide guidance and support to help you understand and apply practice standards, to help you improve your competence, and to help you apply principles of sound clinical judgment. Your mentor will be observing you, discussing your practice with you in relation to the standards. And your mentor will assess if you meet standards and submit reports of your progress to the college. So what are the practice standards? Well, the definition of practice standards is that they are the minimum performance expectations of all speech-language pathologists and audiologists practicing in Ontario in every practice setting. So these are high-level standards that articulate the minimum expectation for our professions, and they apply whether you're working in a hospital, in a private practice, in a children's treatment center, as an independent contractor doing home visits. These standards apply in every situation. And these standards are outlined in the mentorship self-assessment tool that you'll be filling out in your mentorship. And there are also area-specific standards. So for example, CASLPO has practice standards for dysphagia for speech-language pathologists. For both professions, there are standards for assessment. And for audiologists, for example, there are standards for the provision of hearing aid services by audiologists. So taken together, the standards are these high-level principled standards that apply in every setting, but then you're also looking at area-specific standards depending on your practice environment and the areas that you're practicing in. So let me show you some examples of these standards. In the mentorship self-assessment tool, the standards are outlined as categories with indicators that fall under each category. So for example, there's the category of management practice that has 9 indicators, and an example is I follow health and safety procedures and practices. There's the clinical practice category, and there's an example here. I monitor, evaluate, and modify my intervention procedures based on patient outcome. Patient-centered practice has 7 indicators. The example here is about obtaining and documenting consent for all interventions. Communication has 5 indicators. And then professional accountability. And this is a practice standard on professionalism, 5.2. I behave in a professional manner in my practice when providing service to patients and families and when interacting with other professionals. So as you can see, if you look at these standards, you can see how they apply in every practice setting. And what you'll be doing in mentorship is reflecting on these standards, thinking about how you meet them, uploading evidence to show that you meet them, discussing this with your mentor, and that's how you'll work through that practice reflection in your mentorship. I just wanted to point out that there have been some new standards introduced in the last couple of years, and I just wanted you to be aware of what these are because you will see them in your MSAT. So there's a standard on conflict of interest, billing and financial records, clinical reasoning, and in the mentorship period, we do put emphasis on the clinical reasoning standard by requiring you to complete the clinical reasoning tool at the midterm. But you can, of course, use this tool whenever you'd like. It's a very useful tool and you can use it after your mentorship, throughout your mentorship, but we do require it at the midterm time point. There is a standard on advertising and professionalism, which we just looked at. So we'd like to talk about some tips for a positive mentorship experience. We have provided a handout on this topic. So if you haven't downloaded the handouts, there are 2 of them. You should see them available on your screen. You can download both of those, and I would encourage you to do that if you haven't already. And we wanted to give you some information because there's certain things that you can do to prepare for your mentorship and to ensure that mentorship is going to be a good experience, the best experience it possibly can be for you. Every year, the college has approximately 250 initial practice registrants, audiologists, and speech language pathologists who begin their careers in Ontario and who have to do the mentorship period. And the vast majority of the mentorships are very successful. We have gotten very good feedback on the mentorship program from both mentors and initial registrant audiologists and SLPs. They find the mentorship very helpful. But there are certain things that you can do to ensure that the mentorship is going to be as useful and as productive as possible. So your mentorship period will take place in the practice setting, or perhaps settings where you accept your first job as an audiologist or SLP in Ontario. And so let's go through some of these tips and suggestions. So tip number 1, before you accept a job offer, take the time to gain an understanding of the workplace. So you can ask clarifying questions to better understand the dynamics of a workplace and how a workplace functions. So some examples of questions that you can ask are things like, what is a typical day of work like here? Are there experienced SLPs or audiologists on the team? This may be something important to know because you may want to be aware of whether you're going to be the only, or if everybody else is also going to be new who you're working with and maybe in their mentorship, or if there are going to be experienced colleagues that you can speak to. It's important to have a professional network, especially at the beginning of your career. Some more questions that you could ask are, have you provided mentorship before? You can ask your employer. You can ask to speak to somebody who's been mentored in that setting. What kind of support is available for a new employee or team member? What is the best way to communicate if I have questions? Are there particular expectations around selling products or working with support personnel? So by asking questions like this, you get a better understanding of the workplace and you can start to imagine what it will be like to work for that organization, and it helps you to be more prepared for beginning your career and beginning your mentorship in that setting. So the second tip is do your research on an employer or clinic before you begin your new employment. There are some ways that you can do this. This is something that you can do beforehand, and you can use the CASLPO public register, for example, to look up the organization where you'll be working and see the audiologists and SLPs who are working in that setting. You can also have a look at an employer's advertising, including their website and brochures and handouts, and see how they advertise. It's important to note that CASLPO regulates us as professionals. So I'm an audiologist. CASLPO regulates me and my practice as a professional. The college doesn't regulate organizations. The college doesn't have the authority to regulate clinics or facilities where audiologists and SLPs are working. So although an organization may have SLPs and audiologists on staff, and of course we're required to meet standards and follow regulations and legislation because we're regulated health professionals, it's also important to look at the organization. And this is something that you can do before you accept a job. Tip number 3 is ensure you can meet your professional obligations. This is something that you would be looking at as you begin your mentorship as well. So you could maybe look into some of this prior to beginning a job, but a lot of this you'll be reflecting on and considering as you're working through your mentorship period. So we've listed different areas to consider, and each of these areas have practice standards or regulations that are related to the area. So I'm just going to touch on each of these areas. So for fees, billing, and accounts, make sure you understand the billing practices of an employer. We have some different things that you should look at ensuring. For example, ensure your name, professional title, and college registration number appear on invoices. And CASLPO has guidance and documents related to this. And you can also contact a practice advisor at CASLPO in your mentorship if you have questions about meeting the standards of practice. For record keeping and privacy, review the college's documents on record keeping. There are a lot of different documents available. There is a records regulation. Make sure that you understand the record keeping practices of your employing organization. And in your handout, there are lots of links that have been included. And on the website, the college's website as well, you'll find lots of guidance in this area, as well as privacy and security of patient records. Working with support personnel. So this is a question that you can ask before you start a job. Find out if your job will include working with support personnel. Review the college's documents on the supervision of support personnel. So this is a case where you as a speech language pathologist or audiologist will be supervising that support personnel, and the college has requirements around that supervision. So make sure that you understand this and make sure you talk to your mentor about it and reflect on these standards. You can make it a learning goal during your mentorship. Take the time to look into this and ask these questions. Infection prevention and control, of course, very important. And make sure you ask an employer about their infection prevention and control measures and ensure that you can meet the standards. Some additional considerations: will you be self-employed or will you be an employee of the organization? There's different implications to being self-employed or an employee. And know that you can negotiate or seek professional advice on contracts or verbal agreements before you sign an employment contract. So take the time to understand an employment contract and know what you're signing before you sign it. And tip number 4, the final tip, is be clear and honest about the support you will need to practice to the best of your ability. So as I said, the majority of the approximately 250 mentorships that happen in a year are very successful. We have very committed professions. We have very committed mentors in both professions. But difficulties can happen when expectations are not clear between an employee and an employer. So make sure that you ask these questions and be honest about the support that you're going to need. Remember that completing your mentorship and demonstrating that you meet the standards of the profession is your responsibility. So approach your work with professionalism. Seek clarification and support when you're uncertain. And make the most of your mentorship. Make the most of your meetings with your mentor, and seek peer support from your mentor, but also from other colleagues. Your mentor is taking that a specific responsibility by providing you with the mentorship, but other colleagues are also important to consult with, and you can learn a lot from other colleagues that you're working with as well. Okay, so let's get back into the logistics of mentorship. So after your initial registration with CASLPO is confirmed, that's when you can review the mentorship program guidelines and discuss these guidelines with your CASLPO approved mentor. So you can look at the program guidelines before that as well, but when your registration is confirmed, that's when your mentorship will officially begin. So it's important at that point to read through the guidelines, understand the process, look through these guidelines with your mentor, and then you're required to submit a mentorship contract to the college within 30 days of beginning your employment. And we say CASLPO approved mentor because CASLPO has criteria for the audiologists and SLPs who are mentors. And this criteria is available in lots of different places. It's in the program guidelines. It's on the website in the FAQs. So make sure that you have access to this criteria. You can provide a copy of it to your employer or share it with the SLP or audiologist who's proposing to be your mentor, so that they can ensure that they meet these criteria before they agree to mentor you. Just quickly, some important points to discuss with your mentor when you're working through your contract and signing the contract. Determining a start date for your mentorship, and remember that that start date must be on or after your date of initial registration with the college. You'll be discussing the process and requirements for mentoring. So where, how, and when you will be meeting with your mentor and how often. The methods of evaluation and feedback that your mentor will use. And we ask you to identify a third party for conflict resolution on your mentorship contract. Just again, you will be using the mentorship self-assessment tool throughout the mentorship period, and the tool allows for the following. So you'll be assessing your own practice based on the standards. Your mentor will be logging into the MSAT to assess your practice, again, based on the practice standards. You'll be uploading evidence to show that you meet standards and entering comments. We ask you to develop learning goals during your mentorship at the midterm time point and work towards achieving those learning goals by the end of your mentorship. And then mentors submit a midterm and final evaluation report via the tool. And you gain access to the MSAT when your mentorship contract is approved. I've included some screenshots of the MSAT to give you a better idea of what the tool looks like. So you can see on the left-hand side, this navigation bar is showing the 4 different sections of the MSAT that you work through: the professional standards and indicators. Then there's a midterm report and the due date, the learning goals, which you establish at midterm and you complete by the end, and then there's the final report. At the top of each section of the MSAT, there are instructions on how to work through that particular section of the tool. And then this is looking at the professional standards section and what that looks like. So this is showing the particular practice standard here under management practices is I maintain records which accurately reflect the services provided. There are always examples of meeting the standard included under each indicator or standard. And then this is the mentees column, the column that you would be filling out where you rate yourself on that standard. So you either give yourself the rating, I meet the standard, or I need work to meet on the standard. In a few cases, the standard might not be applicable to your practice. You would put in a comment to explain how you meet the standard, or if you have a question, you can put a question in, and you upload evidence to demonstrate that you're meeting the practice standard. And then mentors log in to the tool separately. They are able to view what you as the mentee have put into the tool. They can see your evidence if you have uploaded evidence, and they can provide comments in return or provide some feedback. So just to recap, over the course of your mentorship, what you will be doing: you'll be assessing your own practice and reflecting on how you meet the standards. You do that in the MSAT, providing comments and evidence to demonstrate that you're meeting the standards. You set 3 learning goals at the midterm time point and work towards achieving those goals, and you track your learning goals in your MSAT. You'll be discussing all of the different sections of your MSAT with your mentor. Periodically throughout the mentorship, you and your mentor can log into the tool and look at it together, but you will be reviewing it at your midterm and final evaluation meetings. And we also ask you to prepare 5 charts for your mentor to review at the midterm and final meetings. So your mentor will be looking at a total of 10 of your patient records to confirm that you're meeting record keeping requirements and standards. Over the course of the mentorship, what will your mentor be doing? Your mentor will be providing general guidance on your professional practice. providing guidance on the standards and applying them. At the midterm and final evaluation meetings, your mentors will be, your mentor will be reviewing all sections of your MSAT, reviewing 5 patient records, assessing and confirming that you're meeting the practice standards of the college, and submitting a midterm and final report to the college on those established due dates. And importantly, your mentor in the final evaluation report is making a recommendation. They're recommending you for a general certificate of registration based on the mentorship period. And the college receives these reports. We review all of them, the midterm and the final reports, and we look for your mentor's recommendation that based on the mentorship period, their observation of your practice, their discussion with you of your clinical reasoning, and your demonstration that you've met standards, they are now saying you've demonstrated that your competency to practice, and you'll move from the initial practice category, an initial registrant, to a general registrant of the college. So let's talk about what happens after the mentorship period is completed. So the general certificate of registration will be issued to you when you have, well, number one, when you've successfully completed the mentorship period, but there's other things that you have to complete before you can get your general certificate. And that includes the successful completion of the CETP exam. And if applicable, you have to fulfill any outstanding orders issued by any committee. And then once you obtain your general registration, there are certain things that you need to do for the rest of your career as an audiologist or speech language pathologist in Ontario to maintain that general registration. So to do that, you have to provide 750 hours of patient care or related work in audiology or speech language pathology during every 3-year period. And that first 3-year period begins on the day that you're issued your general certificate. Also, to maintain your general CASLPO registration, you must engage with and meet the requirements of the quality assurance program. So I said that right at the beginning of this presentation on mentorship, that mentorship is preparing you to be a part of the college's quality assurance program for the remainder of your career in Ontario. And when you participate in the quality assurance program, you fill out an online self-assessment tool, and you establish learning goals for your practice each year. 3 are required. You engage in continuing education to meet those goals, and you might be selected for a peer assessment. And so as you can tell, what you do in the mentorship period is very similar to what you'll be doing in the quality assurance program every year. So going through mentorship will prepare you, and you'll be all set to be a part of the quality assurance program by going through the mentorship process. So that concludes this section on mentorship, and we can take questions at this point.
Hi, Samita. I do have some questions for you. Lots and lots of questions have come in. I just want everyone to know I'm trying to get to all of them. And again, if we don't get to all of them, we will respond to you individually. Where is my question for you? Give me 1 second. Okay, well, I have one here. 1 sec. If my mentor and I choose to have a collaborator, does the collaborator also need to meet the mentorship eligibility requirements?
So the answer is yes, they do. The criteria for mentors also applies to collaborators.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The next question I have for you, and this is the only question I have for mentorship, is if I start working as a support personnel prior to being registered, does the 30 days to submit my mentorship contract start when I start working as support personnel, or after I'm registered and start working as an SLP?
The 30 days begins when you become registered and start working as an SLP. So your mentorship can only start when you have your registration with the college confirmed. It can't start before that. So that 30-day, we want you to submit a contract within 30 days. That 30 days starts when you become registered and when you start working as a speech language pathologist.
Thank you so much. I don't have any other questions for mentorship. However, I do have questions for Anne and Colleen regarding registration and CETP. So I was just hoping I could ask those to you guys.
Go ahead.
So my first question is, if my employer hires me as support personnel, can they and I refer to myself as speech language pathologist assistant, or would that go against using an abbreviation or the title?
Yeah, you wouldn't. I mean, mostly the titles that are used are just probably speech assistant, or the other one is probably known as the CDA. But yeah, you shouldn't involve speech language pathologist in your title, or speech language pathologist. Yeah, so don't use speech language pathologist. Just speech assistant is fine though.
Okay, so my next question is, hold on one second. Are the new additions to the website for the CETP exam going to give a more detailed guide to help us study?
It's ever evolving, so we don't have any plans in place for a new CETP exam site, but again, by the time you go through, there'll probably be additional versions, new content. I think it's just the CASLPO website that was going to be quite new in the near future. Am I correct in saying that, Colleen?
Correct. We've just updated our website, but we don't, again, I guess if they're looking for information specific to writing the CETP exam, they would refer to SAC's website. We have information about the CETP exam, but it's mostly around enrolling for the exam, because of the different categories of registration that people could fall into. The enrollment process could differ depending on how they are, what programs that they completed. But if you want information specific to writing the exam, you should go to SAC site.
Sorry, I had spoken too soon and there were some mentorship questions, so I do want to throw it back to Samita. So my first question for Samita would be, who would be considered a third party for conflict resolution? Does it have to be another audiologist or SLP?
It doesn't have to be. It could be a person in a managerial role, which may not necessarily be an audiologist or SLP. It could be an HR person. So there's different people within an organization who could be this person that would provide conflict resolution if that's something that were to come up and needs to be resolved.
Thank you. And my next question would be, are you able to change your mentor partway through the period? For example, say it is not working out with your mentor.
You can change your mentor. There are some frequently asked questions at the end of the mentorship section, and I'll leave those in the slide presentation. One of those questions is, can I change my mentor partway through my mentorship? And the answer is yes, you can. If you change your mentor, it's important to keep in mind though that your mentorship might need to be adjusted depending on how far along you are, and how much time the new mentor is going to require to work with you and talk to you about your practice so that they can evaluate you properly for the mentorship purpose. So the answer is yes. You'll need to submit a new contract with the new mentor's information. Make sure that the new mentor is aware of the criteria and that they meet those criteria. And to ensure that this is going to be a smooth transition, if you know that you're going to be changing mentors, let us know. You can email mentorship@caslpo.com and let us know that this is happening so that we can make it as smooth as possible.
Thanks, Amita. Another one is, what if your mentor does not work in your clinic? How do you share charts with them?
Right. So yeah, so if you need to share charts with them, it's important to ensure that you're going to do this in the most secure manner possible. So the MSAT allows you to upload evidence files, and the MSAT is a secure system. You should always log out of the MSAT when you're done working on it and ensure that you don't share your password with anyone. But one way of sharing records is to upload them to your MSAT, or you can discuss with your employer a secure way of sharing records with your mentor. One way is to have your mentor visit you for the record review on site. That might end up being the most secure way of doing this, if that's a possibility.
Wonderful. Thank you, Samita. My next question is for Colleen. If we are working as an SLP in the field with an initial registration with CASLPO with the signed undertaking, and we failed the first attempt at the CETP exam, are we able to work as CDAs or support personnel until we pass our second attempt?
Yes, and that decision is entirely between you and your employer. So, you know, if your employer wants you to continue working at that location, you would no longer be a speech language pathologist there. You would be a support personnel, and we would, as in that example, you have to be very aware that your duties as an initial practice registrant will not be the same as your duties as support personnel. And so you have to make that change. And, if you're dealing with the same clients, you have to be clear to them that you are now working in this new role, and continue that way so that everybody is clear on the new position that you hold.
Thanks, Colleen. This question is for Anne. Anne, where can we find which centers we can write the CETP exam at?
At the time of enrollment, you'll put down tentatively where you would like to take the exam, either at a specific center or through remote proctoring. And about a month prior to the actual exam, so for example, this week for the July 5th exam, the Proctor Center did send out all the information for the exam bookings. So you'll see in the exam booking options when you go in, again, 4 weeks prior to, where the exams are being offered, and you can enroll from there. So again, just to kind of summarize that, let's say you wanted to write in at the Halifax Exam Center, you'll say that at the time of enrollment. When the booking comes out a month prior to, the proctoring service will match those requests up, and you'll be able to go for that Halifax Exam Center.
Thank you, Anne. One more question for you. What percentage is considered a pass on the exam?
Oh, wow. There is a specific pass.
Maybe Christiane can take this one.
I don't believe Christiane's on the call, and I'm just drawing a blank on exactly what that number is. There's 330 questions. There's 170 questions, sorry. The typical pass rate, or the average for the exam forms, has been between 91 and 94% for those that have written. And I'm not going to be able to give you a specific number there.
That's okay. I'm going to direct this. I'm going to ask that this person give me their email address so that I can forward it on to you, and you can answer them tomorrow or Friday, and you can have the correct answer for them then. No worries. My next question is, do I have to register for CASLPO right away after my application is accepted? So once this person's been deemed eligible for registration, do they have to complete their registration right away, or do they have some time? Will the application expire?
So your application is active for 2 years from the date it is submitted to the college. So as you're going through the process, if as we said, there's kind of that two-stage process, the application process where you're kind of deemed eligible for registration, and then the registration process, which happens before we issue a certificate. So, after you've been deemed eligible, your application can stay active for that period until you decide that you wish to begin employment. And at that point, you would complete that registration process and be issued a certificate. And what we say is the application process is probably the time when it takes the longest, because you have to get documents from other places. So it's good to get that out of the way. And then, you become registered. You can become registered later.
Thank you. So my next question is for Samita. Samita, do we have to do our mentorship in Canada? Is it dependent on where we take the exam?
You have to do your mentorship in Ontario. So it's a CASLPO requirement, the mentorship period. And CASLPO is, of course, the regulator of our professions in Ontario. So in order to count whatever practice you're doing as an audiologist or SLP towards the mentorship, that practice has to be occurring in the province of Ontario.
Yeah. I would just also say that if you say you begin practicing outside of Canada, as long as you have provided 750 hours of patient care in that other jurisdiction, and you, within the last 3 years of making your application to CASLPO, you can apply for a general certificate in that case, which would not require you to complete the initial practice period. So, that's an option for you. You can decide to register for a general certificate if you do have professional experience in another jurisdiction outside of Canada.
All right, we have time for one last question, and I think it's a quick one.
I was wondering if I could just jump in really quickly and answer the question that I missed.
Sure.
And that is that there's 170 questions on the exam. The maximum score is 550, and the pass rate is 330. And I am so sorry, I drew a blank on it.
Don't be sorry, Anne. It happens. It's on the spot, and we get it. So one more question is, previously it was mentioned, this is for Colleen, it was mentioned that an applicant has to give permission for the college to speak to someone besides the applicant. How would one grant this permission?
It has to be in writing. So, if, for instance, you would like us to provide information to your employer, you would have to write us and specify who you would like us to provide this information to. And we would only communicate with that person about the status of your application. Generally speaking, we do encourage you to keep your application process private, and we would only be communicating with you as the applicant during this process. I mean, rarely do we get anybody granting anybody that authority.
Thank you, Colleen. And I think that's all the time we have. So I'm going to leave it pass it off to you again.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. Smita, did we have a final slide with all of our contact information or no?
I apologize, I don't have it at the end of my slide deck.
Okay, no problem.
Yeah.
So I guess, again, we will be posting those slides in the video for this presentation on our website in a few weeks. So, and we will alert you via email when those are available, and we'll include all the links that you need in that presentation when we upload it. So thank you so much for joining us today. I'd like to thank Anne for joining us, and of course, Samita, thank you for presenting today, and I guess we'll just say good night. Bye, everyone.
Good night. Take care.
Night.